They called me a failure, said I was wasting my potential, chasing something beneath our family name. But that night, that dinner, everything shifted. They sat there sipping champagne and judging me like they always had, completely unaware of what was coming next. If you've ever been underestimated, you're going to want to hear this. My name is Avery Collins. I'm 29. And tonight, I'm going back to a table I swore I'd never sit at again. After 5 years of silence, distance, and carefully curated boundaries, I've been invited back into the heart of the family I once walked away from. The Collins family doesn't do vulnerability. We do champagne toasts and tight smiles. But tonight we're gathering, for my younger brother's engagement, at one of the most exclusive restaurants in Manhattan. I live here now, in this city that broke me and built me back up again, one blistered hand and sleepless night at a time. The girl they remember left with nothing but a dream they didn't believe in. To them, I'm still the one who traded legacy for fantasy, and that's exactly who they think is walking through the door tonight. What they don't know is that the restaurant they're dining in is mine. The tables they'll sit at, the menu they'll pick apart, the wine they'll pretend to understand, it's all mine. Every detail, every risk, every sleepless night that got me here. But I'm not ready to tell them that yet. Not because I'm afraid, but because I'm curious. I want to see who they are when they think I've failed, when they still believe they're better, smarter, more successful than me. I want to witness their assumptions before I take them apart, piece by piece, with the one thing they never expected, my truth. But first, I have to walk in like I'm still on the outside looking in. And hey, if you've ever had to sit across from people who doubted you, people who should have been your biggest believers, then you know this feeling, that quiet fire in your chest. You're not alone in it. If this story hits somewhere real for you, take a second and subscribe. There's more to come, and I promise, it's worth staying for. The invitation came wrapped in ivory linen paper, engraved in gold leaf, classic Collins style, opulence over warmth, appearance over sincerity. It was my brother's fiancée who extended the invite, which made sense. She doesn't know our history. She doesn't know the last time I saw my family. I left with tears drying on my cheeks and a silence that lasted half a decade. The venue listed, Vera, a place known for being exclusive, elegant, expensive. A place my family probably chose for the name, for the status, for how well it photographs in a slideshow. What they don't realise is that they're stepping into a world I created, and I'm about to serve them every assumption they ever made, on a plate. I stared at that invitation for days, not because I needed time to decide, but because I needed time to steady myself. Old wounds have a way of feeling fresh around certain people, and walking back into that room meant facing every judgment, every sneer, every offhanded comment I swallowed when I was too tired to fight back. But I chose to go. Not for them. Not for some dramatic reveal. I went because I needed to see it for myself, to know that I could sit at that table and no longer shrink, to know that I wasn't walking in needing validation, just clarity. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming my space, not as a daughter trying to be enough, but as a woman who finally is. The dress I chose wasn't flashy, just a simple black silk slip, one that hugs without trying too hard. It's the kind of dress that says, I don't need your approval, but I'm not afraid to stand out either. I wore it with my grandmother's pearls, quiet strength around my neck, a reminder that not every legacy needs to be loud. As I twisted my hair up and stepped into my heels, I caught my reflection in the mirror. I didn't see the girl who left with nothing. I saw someone who survived the fall and built a staircase out of the rubble. I saw a chef, a business owner, a woman who earned every scar, every success, every inch of peace she carries now. Still, my stomach twisted. Not because I doubted myself, but because family has a way of tugging at your deepest, oldest insecurities. You can do all the therapy, all the self-work in the world, but the moment you step into a room with the people who once told you who you were, it takes real strength not to become that person again. I took a deep breath, not to calm down, but to anchor myself. Tonight, I wasn't walking into a confrontation. I was walking into my own story, on my own terms, and I was finally ready to see how it ended. The car was waiting. The lights of the city sparkled like they were in on the secret. And I smiled, because soon, my family would be too. The restaurant exterior glowed in the evening light, subtle but unmistakably grand. Vera wasn't just a restaurant, it was a symbol, and as I stepped out of the car and looked up at the sign I'd chosen 3 years ago, I felt something unfamiliar, pride without apology, the kind that doesn't need permission, just presence. I didn't walk in through the kitchen tonight, which is where I usually enter. Instead, I walked through the front doors like a guest, like one of them. Each step felt strange but powerful, like I was inhabiting two versions of myself at once, the outsider they remember, and the owner they're about to meet. But not yet. Marcus, my lead server, caught sight of me as soon as I entered. His brows lifted just slightly in silent question. Are we keeping the secret? I gave the smallest nod. He smiled subtly and returned to his work, knowing exactly what I needed from him tonight. No announcements, just silence and precision. From the hostess stand, I could already hear the clink of silverware, the low hum of polite conversation, that calculated background noise that fills expensive rooms like perfume. My family was already seated, of course, always early, always watching. I paused for half a breath, just enough to collect myself, then nodded to the hostess. I'm with the Collins party, I said calmly. And just like that, the stage was set. One final performance, before the curtain falls. They were exactly as I remembered them, flawless, controlled, and hungry for appearances. My mother sat in her usual Chanel, her posture so straight it looked painful. My father, already swirling wine in his glass, examined the label like it was a stock portfolio. My brother, grinning, full of charm and self-assurance. And then there was his fiancée, perfectly polished, no doubt briefed on every family protocol. She looked excited, unaware of the tension hanging just under the surface. The tension wasn't visible, not to them, but to me, it was thick, woven into every glance, every calculated smile. Their eyes landed on me as I approached, scanning me head to toe, judging, measuring, pricing me like I was an item in a store they wouldn't shop at. I could feel it, the way they tried to place me, not as family, as a question mark, a mystery they couldn't quite solve. My mother stood first, leaned in to kiss the air beside my cheek. Darling, you've finally arrived, she said, like I'd been expected at a dinner I didn't RSVP to emotionally. My father's hug was more of a pat, a gesture meant to be read as affection, but practiced enough to feel hollow. I smiled, but not too warmly, just enough to be polite. They didn't know that every inch of this place, the lighting, the service, the wine list, was mine, and I had no intention of giving that away. Not yet. As I took my seat at the round table near the centre of the dining room, I caught glimpses of staff stealing glances in my direction. They weren't used to seeing me out here in a dress, seated with guests, especially not these guests, but they knew better than to react. Not now. The table had already ordered a bottle of champagne, second most expensive on the menu, flashy but not absurd, just like my parents. We've ordered for the table, my mother said, her voice smooth, performative. I nodded, pretending not to know every detail of what they'd chosen. I could feel them trying to figure out what I've been doing with my life. The questions would come soon, veiled in concern but sharpened with judgment. But for now, they were more interested in performing happiness, toasts, small talk, polite laughter. It was their favourite dance. What they didn't realise was, they were performing in my theatre. I'd choreographed every moment, every fork placement, every pause between courses, and now I was watching them move through it, unaware they were part of my design. The irony, delicious. And while they sipped their drinks, talked about vacation homes and wedding plans, I waited, calm, ready, because the story wasn't over yet. In fact, it was just beginning. Growing up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, meant living inside a snow globe version of life, beautiful, still and completely controlled. My family was old money, and they wore that fact like armour. Legacy wasn't just a word in our house. It was law. The Collins name meant expectations, and I never quite fit inside the mould they'd carved. My parents, Stephen and Lorraine, were social fixtures, known at galas, country clubs, and on the boards of foundations they didn't actually believe in. My younger brother, Preston, was their golden boy, already following in my father's footsteps into finance. He was charming, brilliant, and everything I wasn't interested in being. My existence complicated their narrative. From the outside, we were perfect. But inside, I always felt like a puzzle piece forced into the wrong box. I wasn't rebellious. I was curious. I asked questions they didn't like. I found joy in things they didn't understand. Like food, like flavours, like making something from nothing. To them, it was a hobby. To me, it was the only place I felt like I could breathe. I remember once, at 13, baking a lemon tart from scratch. The crust cracked, but the flavour was perfect. My mother barely looked up. "It's lovely, darling," she said, eyes still on her tablet. "But try not to make a mess next time." That was the pattern. Recognition without interest. Praise without warmth. It taught me early that their love was conditional. So I learned to hide the parts of myself that didn't fit. The messy ones, the hungry ones, the ones that wanted something different. I became fluent in their language of perfection, but in secret I was learning another dialect, one that spoke in butter, broth and flame. We had staff growing up, housekeepers, drivers, chefs, people whose names my parents sometimes forgot, but I remembered all of them, especially Marta, our live-in cook from Colombia. She was the first person who ever looked me in the eye and said, "You're not strange. You just see things differently." I still remember how safe that felt. Marta let me into her world, a world filled with smells and textures and stories. She taught me how to listen to ingredients, how garlic talks if you don't rush it, how cinnamon carries memories from generations. She didn't just feed us, she nurtured something I didn't know I needed, and I soaked up every second like sunlight in winter. My mother hated it. She didn't like me spending time downstairs. She thought I was being sentimental, childish. "You're a Collins," she would remind me. Act like it. But what she didn't understand was that down there, among pots and pans and bubbling sauces, I finally felt like myself. For once, I didn't have to act like anything. By 15, I was creating my own recipes. By 16, I had a notebook full of dishes I dreamed of serving one day. But I never showed it to them. I already knew the script. "That's sweet, Avery, but let's focus on real careers." So I hid my passion behind fake smiles and extracurriculars I didn't care about. And I waited. The kitchen wasn't rebellion. It was rescue. It was where I started to believe there might be another life waiting for me. One where I could build something with my hands and feed people something more than just expectations. And I knew, deep down, that if I ever wanted to find freedom, it would begin with fire. College was never really a choice. It was a family requirement. I went to Yale because that's where Collins go. Business major, of course. My father's major. My grandfather's too. I played the part. Suits, internships, networking mixes I hated. And every time someone said, "You're just like your father," I smiled like it was a compliment. But I found my loopholes. I took culinary anthropology as an elective, volunteered in the student cafe's kitchen. I even hosted secret pop-up dinners in my dorm. I'd cook for 12 people, tell stories behind each course, and charge just enough to cover the ingredients. It wasn't about the money, it was about the feeling of being seen. The real shift came in my junior year. I was at a fundraising gala with my parents when one of my father's colleagues asked, "So, Avery, what are you planning after graduation?" I was supposed to say consulting. That was the script. But something in me broke. Instead, I said, "I want to open a restaurant someday." Silence. My mother laughed nervously. "She means as an investor," she said quickly. But I didn't correct her. Not that night. I just let the conversation move on, even as my heart pounded. Because for 1 second I'd said it out loud. The real thing. And once the truth leaves your mouth, it's hard to ever put it back in. That night, I wrote my first formal menu. Not for a class. Not for anyone else. Just for me. I stayed up till 3 a.m. writing course pairings and flavour notes by candlelight. And that's when I knew I could fake the life they wanted for a little while longer. But eventually, I'd have to build my own. I was 6 months into my MBA when it all came crashing down. I'd been miserable for weeks, dragging myself to classes I didn't care about, surrounded by people who spoke in ROI and exit strategies like it was gospel. One night, a guest speaker arrived, Chef Laurent Deneuve, a French culinary legend. His restaurant held 3 Michelin stars. I didn't think much of it, until I saw how he tasted food. I volunteered to help with the catered reception, just setting trays, really. But the chef wandered over to the charcuterie table and tried one of the crostini I had improvised. He paused, looked at me. "Who made this?" he asked. "I did," I replied, nervous. He raised an eyebrow. "This is not amateur." I laughed, assuming he was being polite. He wasn't. He handed me his card. "Come to New York. Come work in my kitchen. If you have the courage to do something real." That was it. No speech, no promises. Just an open door. And something inside me, some hungry, aching part, stood up and said yes. 2 weeks later, I dropped out of my program. Telling my parents was the hardest part. They thought it was a joke at first, then a tantrum, then a betrayal. "We've given you everything," my father said. "And I'm finally using it," I replied. My mother didn't speak for 3 days. My brother told me I was throwing away my future for a hobby. I packed anyway. That night I left with 2 suitcases, a small savings account, and more fear than I've ever felt. But also, freedom. The air outside their front door felt different. It tasted like possibility. I didn't know what was ahead. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending anymore. My first year in New York was brutal. Rent was impossible, the kitchen was relentless. My fingers were always cut or burned, my back always sore. I shared a 3-bedroom apartment with 4 roommates and cooked on a hot plate when I wasn't at work, but I'd never felt more alive. Chef Laurent didn't hand out praise. He handed out challenge. Each dish had to be perfect. Each mistake came with a lesson. He pushed me hard, but he also watched me closely. I wasn't just learning to cook. I was learning to think, to trust my instincts, to lead. Slowly, I started rising. I went from prep cook to line cook, from line cook to sous chef. I worked 12 to 16 hours a day, slept on the train sometimes, and cried into dishwater more times than I'll admit. But I never thought about quitting, because for the first time I chose this life. No one assigned it to me. No one handed it down. And then one night, at a private tasting event for an investor dinner, it happened. A man named James Whitman tried my signature lamb dish. He asked to meet the chef. When Laurent brought me out, James looked surprised. "You made that?" he asked. I nodded. "Ever thought about opening your own place?" That question stayed with me. And 6 months later, with help from James and 2 more investors, Vera opened its doors. Not with fireworks, just a soft launch and a few local write-ups. But word spread, fast. People came, people returned. And slowly, the girl they once called Foolish became the name behind the most sought-after reservation in town. My family had no idea. I kept it that way, on purpose. The occasional call from my mother, an awkward birthday message from Preston, the obligatory holiday card. None of them knew I was building something, that I was finally creating a life that made sense to me. I didn't want congratulations soaked in surprise. I wanted distance. I needed to know that every win was mine, that my success wasn't earned by proving anything to them, but by believing in myself long enough to see it through. I didn't share the press articles. I didn't post about the restaurant online. I lived in the quiet joy of having made it privately, until the invitation arrived. Hand-delivered to my apartment. Thick paper, raised ink, my brother's engagement dinner. And the location? Vera, my own restaurant. It was surreal, like the universe was setting the table for something much bigger than a meal. Like it was time. I laughed for 5 minutes when I saw the RSVP card. Not because it was funny, but because it felt inevitable. Of all the places in the city, they'd chosen mine. Not knowing, not asking, just assuming it matched their idea of excellence. And they were right. Just not in the way they thought. And I knew right then. I'd go, not to rub it in, not to make a scene. I'd go to watch, to listen, to feel every ounce of who I'd become. And maybe, just maybe, to walk into that room as the person I always was, long before they were ever ready to see her. The night I left for New York, I waited for someone in my family to call. A message, a question, anything, but my phone stayed silent. No one checked if I had a place to sleep. No one asked how I'd live. Their silence wasn't neglect, it was punishment. For stepping outside their blueprint, I could have begged. I could have apologized and gone back to the life they wanted for me, but I didn't. I let that silence sit between us like a wall, and I started building my own life, brick by brick, with nothing but fire in my chest and calluses on my hands. Sometimes I'd think about calling them, like when I landed my first job in a real kitchen, or when I passed my certification exam, but I never did, because I knew it wouldn't be celebration on the other end, it'd be skepticism. "Let's see how long that lasts," I could hear them say. I worked holidays, weekends, double shifts. I watched families come in together and leave together, while mine remained a ghost behind my success. There were moments I missed them. Of course I did, but I missed a version of them that probably never existed. One that might have said, "We're proud of you anyway." In those early days, I learned something hard but freeing. Not every story gets a perfect reconciliation, and that's okay. Sometimes peace doesn't come from fixing things. It comes from growing beyond them. There were nights I went to bed with my apron still on, too exhausted to untie it. My first apartment in the city was barely livable, shared with 3 other cooks, 1 bathroom, a kitchen the size of a closet. We didn't have heat some nights, but we had each other, and we had the grind. I burned myself more times than I could count. My fingers were blistered, my feet swollen. I cried behind walk-in coolers and laughed during 2 a.m. shifts when the delirium hit. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine, and for the first time in my life, that felt like enough to keep going. Some days I questioned everything. I'd look at my empty fridge, check my dwindling bank balance, and wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. The doubt didn't whisper, it screamed. But every time I walked back into the kitchen and lit that first burner, something inside me clicked into place again. I started a notebook called Lessons from the Line. In it, I wrote every mistake, every trick, every breakthrough. It was part journal, part survival guide. When I look at it now, the pages are stained and crumpled, but they hold the story of a girl who refused to fold, even when the world around her told her she should. Rock bottom didn't taste bitter. It tasted like raw onions and burnt toast and flat soda after a 16-hour shift. But it also tasted like grit. And when you survive it, you realize something most people never will. Resilience has a flavor too. And once you taste it, you never forget it. Chef Laurent wasn't warm. He didn't coddle. He ran his kitchen like a battlefield, precise, demanding, relentless. At first I thought he didn't like me. He barely spoke, rarely smiled. But one day, he handed me the sauce spoon without saying a word. And in that moment, I understood. I had earned it. The first time he let me plate a dish on the line, my hands shook. He watched silently, arms crossed. I poured the reduction too fast and it smeared across the plate. He didn't yell, just said, "Again." I redid it. Slower this time, cleaner. That was the rhythm of our work. Break, build, repeat. I learned to think like a chef, not just cook like one. Timing, palate balance, leadership under pressure. I started training new hires, correcting plates, tasting sauces with confidence. And slowly, the staff began looking to me, not just as another line cook, but as someone with authority. The hours were brutal. There were nights I walked home with blood in my shoes. But the harder it got, the more I realized I wasn't breaking. I was being forged. The kitchen wasn't crushing me. It was carving out a version of me I didn't know existed. A version that could stand in any fire. One night, after a flawless private dinner, Chef Laurent nodded at me and said, "You're ready, that's all. No speech, no applause, but coming from him, it was everything, and I believed it. For the first time, I believed it. The seed for Vera was planted quietly, almost by accident. After a charity event we catered, an investor pulled me aside. He'd tasted my short rib tortellini and said it reminded him of a dish his grandmother used to make in Florence. "Who's the chef?" he asked. When I said it was me, he blinked, surprised, then intrigued. His name was James Whitman, a venture capitalist with a palate and a passion for underdog stories. We met for coffee a week later, and he asked me a question no one ever had before. If you could build your dream kitchen, what would it look like? I couldn't stop talking. The ideas poured out of me like steam. He didn't promise anything that day, but 2 months later he called. "I want to back you," he said. "Not because it's safe, but because it's right." He brought in 2 more silent partners. We found a location, a defunct jazz club in Soho, and I poured my soul into turning it into a space that felt like possibility. Every inch of Vera came from a piece of me. The curved wood bar, the open kitchen, the lighting that mimics sunrise and sunset. The menu took 6 months to finalize. I wanted the food to tell a story, my story, bite by bite. Honest, bold, and impossible to ignore, just like the path that brought me here. When we opened, I didn't invite anyone from my family. I didn't even tell them. I wanted this win to be mine, not a moment to prove anything, but a declaration to myself. You did it. You were right to trust your gut. You were right to walk away. And now, look at what you've built. Vera didn't explode overnight, but it built momentum like a storm you could feel rumbling from blocks away. Food bloggers came first, then local critics. One called it a symphony in small plates. Another said, it feels like being invited into someone's soul, if their soul was made of duck fat and brown butter. I laughed reading that one. Soon people started to ask for me by name. I wasn't just the chef, I was the experience. That was when I knew Vera was more than a restaurant. It was my home. And every stranger who came through the door and tasted something that made them pause, they were guests in my story. I didn't share any of it with my family. Not the New York Times feature, not the TV segment, not the moment I bought out my investors and became the sole owner. It wasn't out of spite. It was protection. I wasn't ready to invite judgment into the one thing in my life that felt sacred. And yet, I wondered sometimes, if my mother would have appreciated the tasting menu, if my brother would have understood the wine pairings, if my father would have seen this as real success, or just another eccentric detour. I didn't need their praise, but a small part of me still wanted to be seen. Instead, I kept my distance, quiet, intentional. I chose who knew me, who dined here, who got the full story. Vera wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about becoming, and that version of me didn't owe anyone an explanation. Then came the envelope, heavy, cream-coloured, embossed with gold. No note, Just a formal invitation to Preston and Elise's engagement dinner. Hosted at Vera, it read. I stared at it for a long time. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. But something deep inside me shifted. They didn't know. Of course not. Elise probably found Vera online or through her event planner. My parents wouldn't have recognized the name if it wasn't printed in a Forbes article. The irony of it all was almost poetic. After years of ignoring my path, they'd unknowingly chosen to celebrate in the very space I built. I didn't respond right away. I walked the restaurant alone that night, after closing, letting my fingers trail across tabletops and countertops I helped design. I thought about every dish I'd served here. Every night I'd stayed past midnight tweaking sauces. This place held me when they didn't, and now they'd be seated here, ordering off a menu they didn't realize was mine. I had a choice. Tell them, or let the moment unfold. And honestly, I wanted to feel it. I wanted to watch their assumptions simmer, their judgment serve itself, unaware of what was coming next. So I RSVP'd yes, and I didn't tell a soul, not even my staff. This dinner was going to be personal, not dramatic, not performative, just a quiet collision between who I was and who I became. And I was finally ready to see what happened when the two met at the same table. The night of the dinner, I didn't walk in nervous. I walked in awake. Every detail felt heightened. The hum of conversation, the candlelight on the tables, the faint scent of roasted garlic and rosemary drifting from the kitchen. I wasn't walking into just any restaurant. I was walking into my home, and they didn't even know it. My family was already seated, dead center under the blown glass chandelier. Of course they were. My mother's laugh echoed. Sharp, deliberate. My father examined the wine list like he was judging an IPO. Preston beamed beside Elise, who was busy complimenting the stemware. They looked so comfortable, so proud of their own perfection. I paused just out of sight, watched them for a second longer than I needed to. I wanted to take them in like this, untouched by the truth. They were expecting Avery the dropout, the one they pitied behind closed doors. I could feel it, but that Avery was gone, and what was coming next? They weren't ready for it. Marcus spotted me from across the room, just one raised brow. I shook my head subtly. Not yet. He nodded with practiced ease and turned away. We were in sync. My staff knew me well enough to play this moment without a word, and I trusted them completely to follow my lead. Then I walked toward the table, heels clicking against the tile, each step steady. Elise noticed me first, smiling wide like I was just another guest. "Avery, there you are," she said brightly. "We ordered champagne." I smiled back, took my seat, and for a moment, just listened. The conversation was effortless on their side, like nothing had happened. They talked about Elise's dress, the plaza reception, the guest list nightmare. My mother rolled her eyes about the florist. My father laughed about traffic on the LIE, like he hadn't ignored my existence for half a decade. It was oddly impressive. They asked vague questions about what I was up to these days. I gave vague answers. "Still working in food," I said simply. Elise clapped her hands. "That's amazing. I love that you've stayed creative." My mother's mouth tightened, just slightly. Preston smirked into his champagne. The subtle judgments were starting to show. Then came the amuse-bouche, a compressed melon bite with basil oil and black garlic, crafted by my sous chef this morning, one of our signature palate openers. The table examined it like it might bite them first. "Is this all?" my mother asked, eyebrows raised. "This is very artistic," Elise offered. They didn't know they were tasting a piece of the soul they'd tried to extinguish. My mother took the tiniest bite. Preston tossed his back like a shot. Elise left hers mostly intact. "I don't really do garlic," she said. It wasn't offensive. It was expected. This wasn't their world. They didn't know how to taste what didn't fit their script. If you've ever sat at a table with people who expected your failure, who looked at you like you were less because you chose a different path, you know this feeling. You know that silence before the storm. If this moment speaks to something real in you, take a second to like the video and subscribe. And hey, if this story has moved you, you can now support the channel directly with a super thanks. Just click the little heart button below the video. Your help keeps these stories coming. Now let's get back to dinner. The first course arrived. Heirloom tomatoes with whipped ricotta and basil oil, finished with a black pepper tuile. A dish I spent weeks perfecting. To me, it tasted like summer and risk and starting over. To them, it was a salad. Elise poked at hers like it offended her. "Too acidic," my mother declared. "Could have used sweeter tomatoes." I smiled, nodded, took another bite. I knew those tomatoes were at peak ripeness, sourced this morning from an upstate farm that grows only for us. But what mattered wasn't the truth. It was how little they realized where they were, what they were eating, who had made it. Their blindness was stunning, and strangely satisfying. Preston asked if I had any prospects. I laughed into my water. Not at the moment, I said. My mother sighed. Well, dear, don't wait too long, especially with your lifestyle. I raised an eyebrow. Elise chimed in. There's always someone in tech looking for a wife who can cook. It was meant as a joke. It landed like a slap. I watched as they talked over the second course. Seared scallops with miso brown butter and pickled ramps, like it was background noise. My father declared the wine pairing decent, then compared it to some bottle he once had in Monaco. Bradley, Elise's finance bro cousin, tried to correct the sommelier. Marcus didn't flinch. They still saw me as the girl who left, the girl who failed, the girl who didn't have a clue how the world worked, and they were about to realize they were the ones in the dark all along. The third course was my favourite. Handmade tagliatelle with pea puree, pancetta, and lemon zest. It's the kind of dish that looks delicate but lands with authority. It's been featured in 3 magazines. But when it hit the table, my mother frowned. This is all? She asked again. Elise barely looked up. Preston added extra salt before even tasting it. I watched quietly, letting their reactions wash over me like background noise. The old me would have internalized every comment, shrunk in my seat, apologized with a smile. But now, I knew better. Their words didn't reach where they used to. They bounced off a woman made of something stronger. Elise turned to me, smiling too sweetly. So, what exactly do you do, Avery? She asked. Are you a private chef or more like catering gigs? I took a sip of wine. A bit of everything, I said. My father added, everyone has to start somewhere. His voice was gentle, but I felt the barb tucked just beneath it. Bradley, of course, chimed in. You ever think of starting something of your own? You've got the creative side. Just need someone with business sense. My fork paused mid-air. I smiled. That's a great idea, I said. I'll keep that in mind. I wasn't ready to flip the script. Not yet. Let them talk. Because the truth, they weren't just eating in my restaurant. They were swimming in every sacrifice I ever made. Every burnt fingertip. Every sleepless night. Every recipe I failed 5 times before it finally worked. They just didn't know whose name was on the door. The duck breast came next. Perfectly medium rare, finished with a cherry gastrique and spiced farro. It was one of the most technically precise dishes on our menu. I knew it would be the one that tested them. Predictably, Bradley pushed it away after one bite. It's raw, he said. Needs to be well done. My jaw tightened. Jessica, one of my top servers, handled it flawlessly. Apologized, took his plate and gave me a knowing glance as she walked back to the kitchen. She knew what I knew. Overcooking it would ruin everything. But we'd do it anyway. Because that's what service meant, not pride, professionalism. My mother used his complaint as an opening. Darling, if this food thing ever becomes too much, you know you can always come home. Start fresh. There's no shame in admitting when something doesn't work. I stared at her for a long moment. The audacity wasn't even surprising. It was familiar. Preston tried to soften the blow. We're just saying, life's hard. It's okay to accept help. Elise smiled tightly. We were actually worried you wouldn't be able to afford a place like this. The room went quiet for a second too long. It was subtle, but everything had changed. They weren't just judging me. They were underestimating me out loud. I picked up my glass and took a sip, holding it a little longer than necessary. I'm managing, I said simply. No emotion. No elaboration. Just the kind of answer that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't give them control. And in that moment, I knew they were exactly where I needed them. The moment I'd been waiting for arrived. As dessert was cleared, Jessica brought the bill in a sleek black folder, setting it at the centre of the table. My father reached for it instinctively, but Bradley snatched it up with a smirk. Please, I've got this, he said, flexing his watch and his ego in one smooth motion. He opened the folder and froze. His face shifted from smug to confused in seconds. Wait, this can't be right, he muttered. They only charged us for the wine. My father leaned in, frowning. There must be an error. Jessica appeared, perfectly timed, ready for the scene she saw coming from a mile away. I believe that's correct, she said smoothly. Then she turned to me. Miss Collins, would you like me to explain? I gave her a nod. Her smile warmed. Your usual table is ready in the lounge, and the chef asked if you'd like to review the spring tasting menu updates now, or after your investor meeting. The silence was instant and absolute. Elise's smile vanished. Preston blinked. My father's fingers gripped the table. Investor meeting? He asked slowly. I looked at each of them and finally, let the truth slip from my lips. Welcome to Vera, I said softly. My restaurant. My mother was the first to speak. What do you mean? Your restaurant. I leaned back in my chair, steady and calm. I'm the executive chef and the sole owner. The room didn't just shift. It turned upside down, and suddenly all the judgment tasted a little different going down. They didn't say anything at first, just stared. My father looked like he was solving an equation he didn't have numbers for. My mother blinked as if someone had switched languages mid-conversation. Elise's jaw actually dropped. And Preston, he just sat there, eyes wide, like maybe he'd misheard. I don't understand, my mother said finally, her voice quieter than usual. You own this entire place? I nodded. Every table, every dish, every detail. Vera is mine. It felt surreal saying it out loud, but powerful too. Like reclaiming a name they never knew how to say properly. Bradley tried to play it cool. That's impressive, he said. But the tone was off, more surprised than sincere. He looked around like he was seeing the restaurant for the first time, like maybe the chairs got nicer once he knew who picked them. It was almost funny. Almost. Preston leaned forward. You never said anything, he muttered. You let us sit here, talk to you like you were, like I was beneath you. I finished for him. That was the point. I wasn't angry. Just tired. Tired of making myself small so they could feel big. My mother reached for her glass, hands just slightly trembling. Why didn't you tell us? She asked. I looked her in the eye, because I wanted to see how you'd treat me when you thought I had nothing. And in that silence, I finally felt something shift. Not control, not revenge. Just truth. You lied to us, my father said, but it wasn't anger. It was ego bruised. You let us believe you were struggling. I shrugged. I let you believe what you wanted. I never corrected you. That's not the same as lying. He didn't respond. Couldn't, because deep down, he knew I was right. Elise was still frozen, her fork resting on the untouched dessert. You mean, you've been running this place the whole time? She asked. Like, managing? I laughed gently. No, Elise, I own it. I designed it. I run the kitchen. I hire and train the staff. I write the menus. This isn't a side hustle. It's my life. My mother seemed to soften. You should have told us, she said again. We could have celebrated you. I raised an eyebrow. Would you have? Or would you have tried to fix me? Talked me out of it? Called it a phase again? Her silence was all the answer I needed. That history still lived inside us. Preston leaned back, the wheels turning. So, all this time, while we thought you were scraping by, you were actually successful? I nodded. Successful. Independent. Happy. Even when I was tired. Even when I was scared. Because I knew I was building something real. And we just sat here, criticizing it. My mother whispered, the realization finally settling over her like dust. Yes, I said. You did. No accusation. No bitterness. Just a mirror held up to the moment. And this time, they couldn't look away. My father cleared his throat, searching for solid ground. Well, this is unexpected, he muttered. But impressive. Very impressive. It felt like he was trying to reclaim control, make it sound like this was just another business win. But it wasn't. It was my soul on a plate. He didn't have a category for that. Bradley jumped in, as if trying to pivot the conversation. Have you ever thought about expansion? Maybe a restaurant group? I have some investors who'd be interested. I smiled. That's kind of you. But I already have partners I trust. I didn't say no. I said nothing that would give him leverage. My mother reached across the table, her voice quieter now. Avery, I'm proud of you, truly. I just wish we'd known sooner. I looked at her, calm. But you didn't want to know. You just wanted to be right. That truth landed hard. Her eyes dropped to her plate. The tension in her shoulders told the rest of the story. Elise finally spoke again. So you let us spend the whole night talking down to you, while we were literally sitting in your restaurant? I held her gaze. Yes, because I needed to know what version of me you still saw. And now I do. The weight of that honesty sat heavy in the center of the table. For the first time in a long time, they had nothing to say. No advice. No dismissal. No interruption. Just silence. The kind that only truth can create. And in that quiet, I felt taller than I ever had in their presence. They were finally quiet. Not the kind of silence that fills awkward dinners, but the kind that comes when a mirror is held up and you don't like the reflection. My father looked at his wineglass like it might offer an answer. My mother blinked rapidly, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. Preston was still, uncharacteristically so. It was Elise who broke the stillness. So, You just wanted us to feel stupid. I shook my head. No, I wanted to see if you'd respect me without knowing I'd succeeded. She didn't reply, but her expression said enough. Her pride had been bruised, and that felt more offensive to her than anything else. Bradley was clearly recalibrating, probably trying to figure out how to pivot this into a networking opportunity. Well, I have to say, this is impressive. Really, it didn't land the way he hoped. I nodded politely but didn't indulge him. I'd heard enough empty praise to know the taste of it. My mother finally looked up. We judged you, she admitted. All night. We made assumptions. And now I feel ashamed. For a split second, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Vulnerability. Real, unguarded emotion. It didn't fix everything, but it opened a door I didn't know would ever unlock. I didn't come here to humiliate anyone, I said, my voice steady. I came to close a chapter, to see for myself if I could sit across from you and not disappear into the version of me you built in your heads. And in that moment I knew. I hadn't come back to prove I'd won. I came to prove I was never lost. Preston leaned in, finally speaking from a place that felt honest. Avery, what you've done here, it's incredible. I'm sorry I didn't take your dream seriously. I looked at him, surprised by the sincerity. Of all people, I hadn't expected it from him. Thanks, I said, and I meant it. Elise's expression softened, her walls cracking just a little. This place really is stunning. It's not just impressive, it's beautiful, thoughtful. Her voice was quiet now, less performative, and maybe for the first time, I saw her not as the girl trying to fit into our family, but as someone outside of it just like me. My father sighed, running a hand through his hair. I was wrong, he said plainly. No flourish, no justification. I was afraid you were ruining your future, but I see now, you were building something better than we imagined. That kind of ownership didn't erase the past. But it mattered. My mother nodded slowly. You found something real, and you did it without us. That takes strength. There was pain behind her words. Regret, maybe, but also a kind of awe. She'd spent years doubting me, and now she was sitting in a temple I built from the very dream she dismissed. And I didn't need their approval anymore. That was the most surprising part. I wasn't desperate for their validation. I'd already validated myself. Their words were nice, their recognition appreciated, but it wasn't fuel. I was already running on something stronger. Purpose. Marcus returned to the table just as the final plates were cleared. Your lounge is ready, Miss Collins, he said gently. Shall I walk you over? I smiled and stood, grabbing my clutch. Thank you, Marcus. I'll join the investors in a few minutes. The words landed with weight now. They understood who I was. As I turned to leave, my mother stood too. Avery, she said, hesitating. Could we see you again? Maybe this weekend? Brunch. There was no pressure in her voice this time, just a quiet invitation, a hand extended, not to pull me back, but maybe to meet me where I am. I paused, looking at her, and for the first time, I didn't see the woman who judged me. I saw a mother trying to reach for something she'd lost. Maybe it wasn't perfect, but it was real. We'll see, I said with a soft smile. One meal at a time. Her eyes glistened, but she nodded. Preston stood too. Seriously, Avery, this is amazing, and if you ever want to talk expansion, or just hang out, let me know. It felt awkward but honest. I gave him a small nod. Appreciate it. Then I turned, walking away from the table that used to define me, and into the life I'd designed myself. And as I stepped toward the private dining room, toward the people who believed in me before my family ever did, I felt lighter. Not because I had finally earned their respect, but because I'd finally realized I didn't need it to begin with. The next morning I woke up before the sun, not out of habit, but out of clarity. My phone buzzed with unread messages, some from my staff, others from numbers I hadn't saved but somehow recognized. Family members, the same ones who hadn't reached out in years, now wanted brunch. There was no bitterness in me, no victory lap, no smugness, just a quiet peace that settled in my chest like a well-earned exhale. I brewed my coffee and sat by the window, watching the city stretch into morning. The world didn't change overnight, but I had. Later that day I stepped into Vera's kitchen. The staff greeted me with warmth, respect, the kind that's earned, not given. Jessica smiled and asked how the dinner went. I just said, exactly how it needed to. That was all they needed to hear. No drama, just truth. That afternoon, I got a text from Preston, still thinking about last night. You blew us away. Let me know if you're free to grab coffee soon. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was real. And sometimes real is better than big. Sometimes small signs mean something's finally shifting. I replied simply, sure, I'll let you know. Not because I was hesitant, but because I was taking my time now. My story was unfolding on my timeline, not theirs, and it felt good to move without needing to look back for permission. Sunday came faster than I expected. I agreed to brunch at a small bistro in Brooklyn I love, not their usual scene. No valet, no chandeliers, just mismatched tables, strong coffee, and food made with heart. They arrived dressed for a country club, but I didn't say anything. They were trying. That was enough for now. At first, the conversation stayed safe. Weather, work, wedding updates. But slowly, it got more real. My mother asked about the tasting menu. Preston wanted to know how I selected staff. My father even asked about the restaurant's profit margins. I answered each question honestly. No filters, no shrinking. They didn't interrupt. They didn't correct. They listened. Really listened. And that changed everything. For the first time, I wasn't performing for them. I wasn't trying to earn my seat. I had it. And they were just now realizing how much space I could hold. There was still awkwardness, of course. Old habits don't die overnight. But the judgment had faded, replaced by curiosity. And that, to me, felt like a miracle. They weren't trying to mold me anymore. They were trying to meet me. And I was open to that, on my own terms. When the check came, my father reached for it out of instinct. But this time I gently placed my hand on his. "I've got it," I said with a smile. And he didn't argue. He just nodded, respectfully. That moment said more than any apology ever could. A week later, I received a package at the restaurant. Inside was a vintage French cookbook, the spine worn and the pages annotated. No note, just a return address, my mother's. I ran my fingers over the pages, stunned. It wasn't her style, which meant it was effort. Thoughtful. Intentional. That same day, Preston brought his kids to Vera. They were wide-eyed, curious, full of questions. I gave them a tour of the kitchen, let them smell the spices, touch the pasta dough. "I want them to know they can do more than follow a path," he whispered. "They can build one." I smiled. That was the point all along. Even Elise reached out. She invited me to her bridal shower, said she wanted to include one of my desserts on the menu. "Only if you're okay with it," she added. And for once, it didn't feel performative. It felt sincere. We were learning to trust each other, not as rivals, but as women with more in common than we thought. I didn't expect everything to change, but small moments did. Consistent ones, quiet ones, like dinner invites, shared recipes, and actual interest in how I was feeling, not just what I was achieving. It was slow, imperfect, human, and for the first time, I allowed it to unfold without needing control, because true reconciliation isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about building something new from what's left standing, and I finally had the tools and the boundaries to do that well. I stopped looking for moments to prove myself. Somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't need a standing ovation from people who didn't understand the music. Vera had already spoken for me, and the people who mattered, my team, my guests, my community, they'd been listening all along. I began investing in what filled me up, not what would earn a reaction. I launched a small mentorship program at Vera, working with aspiring chefs from underrepresented backgrounds. Saturday mornings became my favorite part of the week, teaching, encouraging, watching confidence rise in faces that reminded me of my own. My family asked about it once. My mum said, "That's very generous of you," but I corrected her gently. "It's not charity, it's continuity." She looked confused, but she nodded. And that was okay. She didn't have to understand everything. Some things were meant to be lived, not explained. What mattered now was that I was building something beyond myself, something lasting, something true, and whether my family was ready to see it or not, it was already happening. That kind of purpose didn't need spotlight, it just needed space to breathe, and for the first time in my life, I was giving myself that space, without apology, without fear, and without asking for anyone's permission to take up room. Healing didn't come in a single dramatic moment. It came in slow, soft shifts. My father asking how the menu planning worked, my mother forwarding me an article about women chefs breaking industry records, Preston texting me photos of a dish he tried to recreate from Vera, burnt but proudly attempted. It came in the absence of old language. No more backhanded compliments. No more "when you're ready to do something real." Just questions, curiosity, hesitation sometimes, but without the bite. They were learning a new way to be, and I was choosing to meet them halfway when it felt right. Some days I still flinched at their old patterns, but I learned not to internalize them. I reminded myself that progress wasn't perfection, and that my worth wasn't dependent on their behavior. They could be imperfect and still love me. I could be hurt and still move forward. That balance changed everything. I also gave myself permission to be distant when I needed to. Not every brunch had to be accepted. Not every message needed a reply right away. Boundaries were no longer walls. They were doors I controlled. I could open them or keep them closed without guilt. And slowly, I stopped bracing for impact. I stopped expecting them to ruin what I'd built, because it was strong now, and so was I. Late one night, I sat alone at my usual table in Vera, the dining room quiet after closing. I opened my notebook, the one I'd written recipes in since college, and began drafting the opening lines of my cookbook. Not the fancy bio stuff, the real beginning, where it actually started, with a girl, a kitchen, and a quiet fire. The words came slower than I expected, but they were honest. I didn't cook to impress. I cooked to remember who I was. That sentence sat at the top of the page like a heartbeat. The rest would follow, and when it did, it would carry the weight of everything I'd lived, and everything I'd released. I thought about that dinner with my family often, not because it hurt, but because it marked something important, a shift, a reintroduction, not just to them, but to myself. That night, I didn't just reclaim a seat at the table. I realized I'd been the one building it all along. No one could take that from me. Not with words, not with silence, not even with love that came too late, because what I'd built was rooted deep, in self-trust, in resilience, in truth. And those things don't wither under pressure. They thrive in it. As I closed the notebook and turned off the lights, I didn't feel like the underdog anymore. I felt like the main character, finally living the story I'd been writing for years, and this time on my own terms. Brunch that weekend felt unlike any we'd had before. My parents had chosen a modest cafe near my place, not one of their usual country clubs. The chairs didn't match, the music was a little too loud, but the food was honest, flavourful, and made with love. That alone already marked a quiet breakthrough. They were in my world now. My mother glanced uncertainly at the mismatched plates. "Is this what they call rustic chic?" she asked. I smiled gently. "It's called not overthinking things." She laughed, and for the first time in a while it didn't feel forced. My dad ordered a shakshuka. He couldn't even pronounce it, but he cleaned the plate. We didn't talk about Vera that day. We talked about books, about Ethan's kids, about my mum's new attempt at yoga. It felt like sitting with people, not roles, no performances, no measuring sticks, just a family cautiously trying again. Before we parted, my father pulled me aside. "You know," he said, "I was wrong. About a lot." The words weren't dressed up. They weren't rehearsed. They were enough. I didn't hug him. I didn't cry. I just nodded. And that was also enough. Sometimes healing starts not with a declaration, but with eggs, black coffee, and a silent understanding that something important just shifted. A week later, Heather sent me an invitation. Digital, but still formal. Dinner at my place. Just us. I stared at the screen longer than I needed to. It was a simple gesture, but one that carried the weight of years. I accepted. I wanted to see what came next, even if I didn't expect much. Her apartment was clean, warm, a little too beige, but hers. She cooked, surprisingly. Pasta with too much garlic and undercooked zucchini, but I ate every bite. "I wanted to try," she said sheepishly. "I figured you'd laugh." I didn't. I thanked her, and I meant it. Over wine, she admitted that her engagement had ended. Turns out being someone's trophy wasn't as fulfilling as I thought. She said it with a laugh, but there was real pain behind it. "You were right about choosing for yourself," she added. That meant more than any apology. I didn't gloat. I didn't preach. I just listened. Because I knew now what I didn't then. We're all just trying to unlearn the stories we were handed, and sometimes that takes longer for some than others. Her story wasn't finished. Neither was mine. When I left that night, I hugged her at the door, not out of obligation, but because I wanted to. The silence between us felt softer now, full of things we didn't need to say out loud anymore. Vera's anniversary came quietly. 1 year of full ownership. 3 years since opening. 5 since I'd walked out of my family's house with nothing but determination. I hosted a small dinner for the staff that night. Family meal, but with champagne. They'd earned every bubble. We toasted to progress, to burn scars, to late nights that became mornings. Marcus made a speech. Jessica cried. Miranda brought out a cake with "still cooking," written in perfect piped chocolate. We laughed so hard it echoed through the empty dining room. It was joy, the grounded kind. That night, as I stood in the kitchen wiping down the prep counter, I thought about that first dish I ever made for my friends. A pasta with lemon and thyme, probably overcooked and underseasoned, but made with heart. That same heart was still in everything I served, just with sharper knives now. My mum had sent flowers that day. No note, just a card that read, "Proud." I didn't call to thank her. I didn't need to. Some gestures don't require acknowledgement to be understood. They're like seasoning, meant to blend in, not steal the show. And standing there, under the soft buzz of kitchen lights, I knew I hadn't come full circle. I'd made a new one, a better one I chose, built and filled with the kind of love I once only cooked toward. Ethan brought his kids to the restaurant one rainy Saturday morning. They were curious, wide-eyed, and entirely unimpressed by the fact that I was on YouTube. But when I showed them how to make fresh pasta from scratch, something clicked. Flour dusted their sleeves. Joy lit their faces. "They've never seen someone love their job like this," Ethan whispered to me as they kneaded dough. "I want them to know this is an option." That struck me more deeply than he probably knew. Sometimes the legacy we pass on isn't status, it's freedom. Permission to dream differently. The kids asked if they could come back next week. I said yes. Ethan offered to help with kitchen setup. I let him. Our past didn't vanish with a gesture, but it softened, and sometimes that's all you need to begin rewriting old roles. Later that day, he texted me. "I see now that your success isn't despite your choices. It's because of them." I stared at the message for a long time. It wasn't just validation, it was recognition. And recognition, given freely, holds more power than praise ever could. That weekend, I wrote new policies for our kitchen mentorship program. More seats, more reach. Because if one small spark could shift an entire family dynamic, imagine what it could do for a stranger still waiting to be seen. I sat at my office desk late one night, the lights of the city blinking outside the window. The cookbook was nearly done, recipes finalised, layout approved. What was left was the one page that mattered most, the introduction, the story behind the food, the why of it all. I had started and deleted the first sentence 100 times. It's easier to share technique than vulnerability, but this page mattered, not to impress, but to invite, to tell someone out there who still feels unheard, you're not alone. You can start from anywhere, even nowhere. I wrote about Elena, about the smell of oregano on her apron, about her warmth when the rest of the house felt cold. I wrote about flour on my school blazer, about stolen moments in the kitchen after midnight, about how flavour became my rebellion, and eventually, my identity. Then I wrote about now, about the team, the restaurant, the family, fractured but healing, about building a home with knives, fire and patience, and how, in doing so, I stopped chasing approval and started honouring truth. By the time I finished, it was nearly dawn. The city had gone quiet. My hands were sore, my heart full. That page wasn't just an introduction. It was a thank you letter to every version of me who refused to give up. 1 year after that unforgettable dinner, I hosted another one. Same table, same room. But this time, by invitation, not accident. My family arrived slowly, dressed simpler, smiling easier. There was no performance, no test, no agenda. Just dinner. Just us. Heather brought a bottle of wine from a small vineyard she'd discovered on a solo trip. "Thought you'd approve," she joked. I did. She looked different now. Still sharp, still proud, but less armoured. She asked questions about our seasonal menu. She even praised the duck. My father asked for a tour of the kitchen. My mother complimented the staff. Ethan helped Marcus light the candles. Alison took pictures with the team. No one called cooking a phase. No one asked about my finances. The restaurant wasn't a surprise anymore. It was simply part of who I was. As dessert was served, roasted pear tart with thyme caramel, my mum reached across the table. "We're glad you brought us here tonight," she said. I smiled. So am I. There was no dramatic speech, no apology montage, just shared food and steady presence. Sometimes that's enough. And as we clinked glasses, I realised I wasn't trying to belong at that table anymore. I had built one of my own, and now, finally, they'd earned a seat at it. Have you ever had to stand alone in order to build something no one else believed in? If so, I see you. This story wasn't just about food or family. It was about resilience, about taking the longer road not to be right, but to be real. And sometimes that makes all the difference. If this story stirred something in you, if you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told your dreams were impractical, remember this. Your path doesn't have to make sense to anyone else. What matters is that it feels true to you, that it feeds something deep within. I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Where are you on your journey? Whether you're at the beginning, in the messy middle, or finally tasting the sweetness of your own success? I want to know. Your voice matters here, and this space was created for stories just like yours. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps more than you know. And if you feel called to support this type of storytelling, consider clicking the Super Thanks button just below. It's a small way to help keep stories like this alive and growing. Above all, keep choosing yourself, even when it's hard, even when no one claps. Because in the end, the most meaningful success isn't about proving anything to others. It's about honoring your truth and sharing that light with the world. Thank you for being here.